Uh, MMA has got some interesting stuff. Now, I was kind of almost waiting to see if he was going to do the Medusa and say, "This is what I think of the UFC belt," and just drop that bitch in the trash. But that's not what happened. Um, if you guys have been living under a rock, it has now been confirmed that Francis Ngannou is now no longer the heavyweight champion or with the UFC. So it's pretty wild to me that this happened. But I gotta say, after hearing the interview with Ariel Hawani, I very much so respect Francis Ngannou for doing what he felt was right and sticking up for other people. But boy, when you hear about some of the things that he asked for in that contract, I don't know how anybody could have thought that this negotiation was going to go any different. What are your guys? What are your the J Bone? What is your initial thoughts on
What are
Ngannou?
what are the? Do you have the details in front of you? What he wanted out of
Yeah,
the contract?
A
he
fighters
wanted
union.
fighter. Well,
He
he
wanted
basically
he
said he wanted fighter benefits. He wanted the medical expenses
well
for every fighter
that
paid
was
for.
that was the other point, and then he also wanted what was the third? It was healthcare. It was
He
a
wanted health
basically a
care. He wanted
fighters
a fighter
union, and
advocate, not a
yeah,
union. He wanted a fighter advocate in every fight negotiation. And then he also
yeah,
wanted them to be able to have sponsors,
Mm,
individual sponsors, which again
yep,
we know isn't going to happen because they have the Venom deal. It's
right.
just, I mean, don't
yeah.
get me
But
wrong, I understand wanting it, but
you could easily change that though because they already have something in place with Monster where they patch Monsters patch on all kinds
I'm
of
not
fighters
saying you
gear.
couldn't. I'm just telling you,
You could easily get a stack of 200 companies or 100 companies or 50 companies or 20 even that are
right.
approved by the UFC that these are we're officially endorsing the fact that you can have stake.com or whatever the hell on your shorts because they're also paying us to be on the canvas and they've worked with us in the past. You can have Modelo written on your walkout shirt or something like that because there's so many things they could have done in that regard. You're absolutely right, Kyle. I was miswording the thing with the fighter union and the fighter. Uh, Essentially, what he was the way he was
He
wording
was
it was
really just
similar
harping
to
on the
like a
medical stuff. Is
well,
he wanted the medical stuff and a fighter advocate, basically
yeah,
meaning what he meant. What I surmised of what he was trying to explain is basically a fighter advocate to in between a fight negotiation, so you have somebody that's trying
yeah.
to,
What
you know,
what I was getting to is he was saying basically it would be like an NBA players union, where it's not an actual
Mm,
union where they're like subtract, like everybody has to be involved type of like a fighters alliance union type of thing. It would be more of like, okay, you're actively signed under the UFC at the moment. We're going to have a third party negotiating tactic beyond just our managers where you have to also deal with them and make sure everything's kosher, I guess you can say, and
right.
following, it's in the best interest of both parties essentially.
Sounds like a
And
lot, but I mean, I think it all comes down to like, look, man, this is the UFC. This is the top notch company, and if that doesn't show you right there, your best heavyweight, your champion of the world, if he's not gonna change it, dude, I don't think you really got a shot. So
yeah,
they're gonna stick to their guns, man. So I mean, I hate to say it, but it's like you either like what they're gonna provide and give to you, or hit the road, I
I
guess.
mean, this was a
it's
statement
just
from the UFC, like plain
yeah.
and simple. If you don't see this as a statement from the UFC, I don't know
Yeah.
how else you look at it, because they basically said, look, we run this. If, and like he just said, if the heavyweight champion can't change that stuff, it ain't gonna happen. And
Yeah.
here's the thing, even we haven't talked about where we think he'll end up next, but whether it's PFL, Bellator, a Ryzen, bare knuckle, take your pick. If he were to go in there and try to get that in a contract right off the rip, he might get one of them, maybe even 2 of them. But you ain't getting no fight promotion to give you all 3 of those. There's no way in hell. And the other thing that, from what I'm reading, was the stick, and what he said was the sticking point with him in the UFC is that he only wanted a 3-fight deal. They wanted to get him for a more extended contract, and he said he didn't want anything more than a 3-fight deal. Now, with those 3 fights, if they were the fights that he said he asked for, which for what reason do we think he has to lie? Because he's been saying this whole time, if they didn't give him what he wanted, he wasn't going to walk, and he did.
Yeah.
And I mean, he said he wanted to fight John Jones, which is the fight everyone wanted to see. He said he wanted to fight Stipe. And then he said he even said he'd fight Gane again, but he said the 2 that he wanted were Jones and Stipe. And I mean, really, yeah, those are the fights they wanted. But again, the sticking points sounding like the amount of fights and all the other stuff. Well, that being said, I mean, Corey, what do you think, and where do you think he's going to go?
I mean, all right, to sum up, I guess my thoughts on it is props to Ngannou for sticking to his guns. For if that's truly how you feel, which I feel as though each one of those points individually for a proper sport to be growing and to gain the notoriety that I feel like MMA as a whole, but UFC in particular has. I feel like that's the type of stuff you need to be taken more seriously from some of the higher, I guess, viewpoints of the world, or however you would want to word that, but taking care of your fighters healthcare wise in between fights and stuff like that, that's something I feel that should already be instituted. The whole arbitrator type of deal that he was asking for with the middleman thing with the UFC, that one was a little bit of weird to me. I mean, you already have your manager to do that. That's kind of why you pay the guy, in my opinion. So that one I was a little more confused about myself. But I feel like there wasn't anything in like some glaring hole in what he was asking for where like they shouldn't have been able to at least take care of some of this stuff. I understand they have a huge bloated roster and it would be almost impossible to, how do you offer general health care to somebody that lives in Kyrgyzstan or some, like some far country where the regular services that a healthcare provider over here, an insurance company would, like, how do you even do that? You know what I mean? It would just be, there's such a red tape in that. I don't know how to sum up all my thoughts, I guess, on this, other than the fact of like this, it is very telling that the heavyweight champion of the world can't make serious change in the organization before they just let him go. I understand they offered him some real money and stuff to stay, but that's where I commend him for not just taking the money and saying, I guess that'll do. He really stuck by his guns. So, but in the future, I don't know, man. I really don't know. I know we had a short discussion about it, Kyle. I feel like his long-term move is probably PFL or the Bellator, but I feel like Bellator's, I don't know. I feel like Bellator, the way that they're kind of situated, they've been very stagnant for a very long time, and for them to make a huge investment in somebody like Francis Ngannou to then run through their heavyweight division, I don't know. I feel like at least in the PFL, it would be a little more of an interesting topic other than just like one-off fights with Ryan Bader or, Fedor or some shit, like who does Bellator got that it would be like, super entertaining heavyweight fights. So I feel like at least the PFL with the season format or with the pay-per-view thing that Jake Paul's starting to do with them, something like that would be interesting. But in the short term, to wrap up my answer, I think it's going to end up being boxing. He's already kind of came out and said that he hasn't announced an opponent or anything like that, but he targeted, I believe, July. So we shall see what comes out from that. But that's
Think he does well in boxing? Do you think he does? I mean, I know he's a professional athlete. He's combat.
He can knock anybody out.
Deontay Wilder did really fucking well in boxing, and he was only trained for like 3 years when he was making his run through like
Yeah, but
legitimate
Deontay
people
Wilder's a lot better boxer than fucking Ngannou, though.
But is that just because we haven't seen Francis Ngannou actually in a boxing situation? Like
Maybe, but
I agree. I mean, the it's almost crazy to think about, but I mean, like, there's so many.
okay, let's put
Like,
it in this comparison, right? Like we're talking about boxing versus an MMA as far as just straight up boxing. Tyson Fury is the heavyweight champion. Francis Ngannou is the heavyweight champion. Tyson Fury would beat the fuck out of Ngannou in a boxing match. I love Francis Ngannou, but
yeah,
unless
but you can,
Francis Ngannou catches him,
yeah,
dude, Tyson Fury would box circles around that man. That's all I'm saying. In a straight up boxing match. In an MMA fight, Ngannou might fucking kill him.
but that's just a rule set thing.
And
But yet again,
that's what I'm saying. If we're talking about
when
straight boxing, because you're talking about him going to boxing,
yeah,
I
but when
worry
you're,
that
go ahead. Sorry.
I just worry it. So here's the thing. Okay, so let's just say, okay, he goes to boxing, he fights some no-name heavyweight. The first fight, let's say he just knocks his lights out. Okay, goes in, knockout, heavyweight knockout. Then how do you ingratiate him to like the higher echelon?
Does he even do that, or does he go diving straight into the deep waters? Because I think he just dives straight into the deep waters. I think we see him
Dude, but do you think
versus
he
a
could really
Deontay
even beat, like,
Wilder.
let's say Anthony Joshua?
Maybe. I mean, maybe. I realistically
He can
probably
knock
not.
anybody out. So yes, he
Yeah.
can beat any of them. I'm just saying in a straight up boxing match, I just don't know how I see it. As far as to what I go,
Sorry, but to round out my point, the reason why I say I feel like he's going to go into the deep waters is because the way the Conor McGregor route was handled. I feel like if you're going to do it, you're going to do it. I know the UFC was involved in yada yada, so that was a different thing. And now Francis Ngannou is representing himself, but still, I feel like he's going to go straight into the deep waters. He's going to fight somebody like a Deontay Wilder, Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, one of these top end, like somebody that's going to also sell pay-per-views, basically is what it boils down to. Because I
That would
don't
be
think
a
he's going to,
hell of a first fight if it was Deontay Wilder. I tell you that, dude.
yeah.
That would
I mean,
be.
it wouldn't be a bad matchup, but boy, you'd find out real quick because if he lost in that first fight, boy, that's why, to be honest, I really don't want him to go the boxing route. I really don't, because
Does he lose that much steam if he loses? And
if
it
he goes
depends
in
on,
there and gets knocked the fuck out, he does. If he gets knocked out, he does, and I don't want to see him lose any more bargaining chip for him to go somewhere else, because I still feel like he got the shit end of the stick with the UFC, even if I think that maybe that wasn't the most smart negotiation tactics. Now, as to where I think he can go, like you said, we talked about this. Now, I think the most advantageous might be PFL because of all the stuff with Jake Paul and their want to grow and the amounts of money that they're throwing out to people. I think that they could be a definite contender for Francis Ngannou. But that being said, Ngannou's already said he doesn't really want to sign more than 3-fight deals. So if he goes to PFL, I don't know that he would want to fight through a season. Now, obviously,
it's only
with
one additional fight. It wouldn't be 4 instead of 3.
but I didn't let me finish my point. So here's the thing though. I also understand that if there's $1 million at the end of a tournament, that can motivate a motherfucker to wanna go fight through a season. So again, I understand that there's eyes to it. And again, to Corey's point with the Jake Paul thing, that could be alluring too, because everybody looks at him as the cash cow right now. But I'm going to offer a different solution, and it is still in the MMA realm, but I really think that Bellator might not be a bad way to go for a few reasons. number one, Scott Coker has seemed to be a lot easier to deal with for fighters and has been a lot more pro fighter. So I feel like he might be more willing to listen to some of the things that Ngannou wants and maybe be willing to bend on some of those things that maybe Dana wasn't. Again, I don't think he'll get all three of them in any promotion, but I do think that Scott Coker or a PFL may be more willing to hear some of that out. The other reason that I think that Bellator is the better option is because Bellator actually has a heavyweight division. They actually have some names in that heavyweight division. Yes, PFL has a heavyweight division, but there is no real names of note. Yes, they brought in Verdum, but we've never seen him fight again since that first fight, and there's not even been any rumblings of another fight. Now, obviously, if an Ngannou comes in there, but let's be honest, if he goes in there and fights an aged Verdum, does that really do a whole lot for Francis Ngannou, who was just the UFC heavyweight champion? Not really. So that's why, in my opinion, the biggest thing when it comes down to a landing place for him is it's going to be obviously the most obvious in how much is he getting paid. And on top of that, what of those things are going to be met? Because I'm sure he's going to ask for something similar wherever else he goes. But to me, it's going to come down to, does Francis want who's going to give him the most money? Or does Francis want to go somewhere where maybe they have a little bit of a built up heavyweight division to a degree, not built up to the extent of the UFC, obviously, but have some people there for him to fight that he could go in there and be the kingpin of a division. I think it all kind of depends on how he wants to play it and also how he decides to try to structure these contracts. In that, is he going to try to go the route of, okay, I signed with PFL, but if I want to go box, I can box. And if I want to go do, X, Y, or Z, I can do that too. I kind of just feel like it all comes down to how this is all structured. J-Bone, what about you, man?
Well, my question is, do you guys think that that's the last offer he gets from the UFC? Do you think that, because I know they lost their right to match now, right? As of him being released.
They gave up their right to match. They didn't.
They didn't, because he walked. They keep swinging it like they gave up their right to match. They didn't give up shit.
Yeah,
the UFC did not give up shit. The UFC had no say in the matter anymore because he fought out his contract and it exceeded the time limit.
Everybody, so do you think in a couple months they don't come back and say, "Hey, look"?
I'm not saying they might not, but again, that all goes back to my point.
To your point, though, I don't think there's anybody out there for him. If you're going to fight the best guys in the world, you got to fight in the UFC.
Sure, and there's no arguing that. But that's why I'm saying I think a bigger offer or a better offer with the UFC is all going to depend on two things. Number one, what Francis Ngannou does outside of here. Meaning, A, does he sign with somebody else? Or, okay, he says he's going to go the boxing route. If he goes out the boxing route, and let's just say he gets caught and knocked out or doesn't look that great, well, then that's going to fuck up some of his bargaining chip. So I think those are the two big factors on what if the UFC is going to come back around. I don't think it's a question that he still has the value because he walked away as champion. And as I've talked about till I'm blue in the face with this whole thing, he beat the greatest heavyweight of all time. He won. He won against Ngannou, and Ngannou is the guy who you've got in there in this new heavyweight title fight against Jones. I mean, realistically, he beat everybody in your heavyweight division outside of Jones.
The quote-unquote GOAT, so maybe John Jones finds his way to that heavyweight title and some money starts flowing, and all of a sudden
I got no problem with that. And I wouldn't be shocked to hear John Jones call it out. I really wouldn't. And I wouldn't be shocked to hear John Jones get on a microphone and kind of back up Ngannou to a degree, because John Jones has been another one who's been vocal about what people should get paid and those kind of things. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if, let's say John Jones goes in there and does what most of us think will happen. And that's that I would think that he's going to beat Sorogan. But let's also not forget that John Jones also is coming off of his 2 most lackluster performances. When you talk about
And a significant
Dominic,
time layoff too.
exactly.
How long
So
has
I
it
mean,
been
it's been
since his last one?
1,121 days to the day that they announced that he was going to be back.
Jeez.
He signed a contract. So it's that plus whatever it's been since.
Oh,
So
boy.
I mean,
That's
here's
why
the
he's
thing.
the underdog. That's why he's the underdog on DraftKings. Just
Well, no, and don't get me wrong, dude. Like I'm excited as much as anybody to see what he does, but at the same time, I mean, let's not forget he's moving up to heavyweight. Let's see how he does when he gets in there with another person who's a heavyweight. So, I mean, I don't get me wrong. I still think John Jones does great, and I think if John Jones fights how John Jones can fight, I think he takes Cyril Gane down and beats him up on the ground. But like I said, time will tell, and we'll have to see what happens. I'm just glad that we're going to see John Jones back in the cage. But
Yeah.
to finish the thought on Ngannou, I mean, dude, like I said, do I respect the move? Yes, 100% I respect it. I get what he was trying to do. I think it's noble of what you were trying to do. Do I think that that was ever possible, that was going to happen? No. I mean, but I give him credit for shooting the shot. I mean, and arguably, if nothing else, man, at the very least, my biggest hope is that this means that man gets paid.
Yeah. My one thing to round out my thoughts, I guess, on this point, I think Bellator is probably the realistic landing spot, even though I feel like it is the least interesting to me, just because of the fact that Bellator has a proven track record of letting their top athletes go compete in other sports with cyborg boxing, um,
MVP doing bare knuckle.
MVP. That's I couldn't think of his name, but MVP doing bare knuckle. They've let quite a few of their top level athletes go off and do other sports, even current champions for them and stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see that route, just simply based on the fact that they're more allowing of that stuff and the in cage sponsors and all that type of stuff as well.